Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is imploring world leaders to provide more support to Ukraine as they launch a counter-offensive attack. Between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian troops are believed to have died in the conflict so far. Sky News' Sally Lockwood has the details.
Ukraine is desperate for more Western support. They're fast running out of weapons and ammunition. President Zelensky has called for all manner of things when it comes to extra support, and certainly what NATO's offered today has been welcomed here in Ukraine. But those high-end talks in Brussels, which are due to help people here in Ukraine, the 44 million people that are so traumatized by the last month of war, a quarter of the population now displaced. Certainly, they're desperate for that help, but many of them don't have the luxury of following those diplomatic developments. And some of the most desperate people in the country, well, they simply can't be heard anymore. That city in the south of the country, Mariupol, which has been bombed for weeks now, well, that has been without power, without food and medical supplies, without internet and phone signal for weeks. And we've just received some rather stark new drone images from Mariupol, which is about as close as we can get to the city, just showing a huge line of people waiting for humanitarian aid in a city that has been largely destroyed by bombing both day and night for weeks now. Now, attacks from the air remain one of the primary concerns here. The ground offensives have largely stalled and failed in some areas of the country, but the air assault, certainly Mariupol is the most stark example of that, and it's fast becoming one of the biggest humanitarian disasters of modern times.
Ukraine's Navy claims to have destroyed a Russian landing ship near the coastal city of Berdyansk. Pictures appear to show fire and plumes of smoke near the Sea of Azov port, which has been under Russian control since February 27, not all of it, but most of it. In a social media statement, Ukraine's Navy claims it destroyed the Orsk landing ship. Russia has not yet confirmed the attack, though. Investigators are still trying to determine why a Boeing 737 passenger jet crashed in southern China, killing all 132 people on board. DFAT has confirmed no Australians were believed to be on that flight. Emergency services at the crash site have now found some debris, but there's no sign of any survivors in the heavily forested areas. They are searching for the aircraft's black boxes to try and explain its very sudden descent.
The proof of the violence of this crash is just how little wreckage there is left to see. Only fragments of China Eastern Flight 5735, carrying 132 people, remain. The plane was atomized. These tiny pieces are a terrifying end, but they are clues too. It is hard to piece together this puzzle in the middle of these remote southern mountains. But along with the experts, an army of volunteers is here too.
We people here always heard the sad news. We just think life's most important thing. We just want to help the screen team. We hope they will find survivors, and I believe they will finally find the fact what happened.
The volunteers have their work cut out though. This is a makeshift search and rescue centre in a local village near the crash site, but we arrived here to the terrible news that there are no survivors from that plane crash. Instead, what these volunteers are going to do is go to that mountain, find every last scrap of metal that they can. These are tiny scraps from that huge crash, and try and piece together what happened. The video you're about to see, captured by a CCTV camera, is distressing. It appears to show a jet nosediving fast into the ground. Only minutes before, it had been cruising normally. That rapid, uncontrolled descent is incredibly unlikely in a modern passenger jet.
One of the two black boxes have been retrieved from the wreckage of the China Eastern Airways flight that nosedived with 132 passengers and crew members on board. The black box is reportedly in such poor shape that officials can't distinguish if it is actually the flight data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder. The cause of the crash in China's south is still unknown. Aviation officials warn it will be difficult to determine the cause, considering the severity of the damage to the aircraft. The search for victims of the crash has been halted as heavy rain increased the risk of landslides in that area. Closer to home now, the Solomon Islands is in discussions with China to allow military forces to be stationed in the Pacific nation, according to a leaked document. The document says it will allow China to protect the safety of Chinese personnel and major projects in the Solomon Islands. Ships will be allowed to stop over at the archipelago, 1,700 kilometres off the coast of Queensland. Solomon Islands has been increasing its ties with China since severing diplomatic relations with Taiwan in 2019, and that ultimately led to those riots and protests on the Solomon Islands last year, with which Australia had to send forces. Joe, good morning to you. In recent times, there has been so much talk about the potential for peace talks. It often takes more than one, as we're seeing here. There could be upwards of a dozen before anything really concrete can emerge here. But how do you see, firstly, do you think we are at any kind of point where peace may well end, or at least the fighting may well begin to scale back?
Good morning, Pete. Yeah, I think we're getting very close to some kind of negotiations. The Turks have replied on Reuters this morning that there are 6 negotiating points, mainly around security, disarmament, and neutrality declarations that the two sides are agreeing on. But I don't think we're going to see any abatement of the violence up until the talks themselves. Like the Vietnam War, you had violence right up until the end for people to get position, et cetera. And of course, at the end of the day, the talks have to do several things. They have to give President Zelensky a face-saving way out of this disaster. I mean, he's on top of a disaster. He's got to accept responsibility for some of it, even though he's been very heroic. And he has to survive. And what he wants is Ukraine just to be viable at the end of the day. Minus the Donbass and minus Crimea and that kind of thing. And of course, Putin has to save face. A large number of Russians have opposed this war, quietly and not so quietly. But there's also a large silent majority there, which supports the war in terms of returning Ukraine to the fold, et cetera. And of course, President Biden, Pete, he can't win this one. He hasn't done enough for some people. He has done too little for other people. I mean, he was already on the ropes. And there was no great plan for how to deal with this. Biden reminds me of Mike Tyson's famous line, "Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face."
Yeah. Well,
poor Biden never had a plan.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has told the Italian parliament that his country is on the brink of surviving the war with Russia. Mr. Zelensky says Russian troops have been looting and kidnapping children. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says civilian evacuations will continue, focusing on helping those trapped in the besieged city of Mariupol.
One after another, the bombs fall. This time, the target is an industrial centre in Mariupol. Factories that once provided jobs, destroyed in an instant. Mariupol has been under constant fire for weeks. Homes across the city reduced to ruin. Officials say around 90% of buildings have been damaged here. The incessant fighting has forced these Ukrainian families to flee. But with nowhere to go, they line their cars along one of the city's roads. The Russian word for children clearly marked on windows, hoping this might keep them safe. But in this besieged city, it seems anything goes. Russians have attacked hospitals, schools, a theatre. These satellite pictures show the vast extent of destruction. Time is running out for people trapped inside this city, as food, water and medicine are scarce.
300,000 people in Mariupol without food. It's not the war anymore. And in the sieged city, we clearly see that Russia wants to start hunger just to enforce its diplomatic position on the diplomatic processes. And that's Russia does.
And there could be a further threat. Chechen soldiers have released this video claiming they are in Mariupol and have joined the fight. The location or date of this footage couldn't be verified, but the Chechens want to show they're standing strong with Russia. Ukraine's leader remains defiant, but is yet again calling for help from Europe. Speaking to the Italian parliament this time, Zelensky warned the Russian advance won't stop at Ukraine.
We are now on the brink of survival. Ukraine for Russian troops is the gateway into Europe, where they want to break in, but this barbarism must be stopped. You know who brought this war to Ukraine. Those who are supporting this war, all of them are using Italy as a place for holidays. So please don't be a holiday resort to murderers.
Our top story this morning, Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister says Russia is committing acts of genocide. As officials say, Russian forces have bombed an art school in the port city of Mariupol, where 400 residents, mostly women and children, had taken refuge. There are also claims this morning, which cannot be confirmed, thousands of Ukrainians have been forcibly taken to Russia. Residents who remain in Ukraine have described street-to-street fighting and their struggle to stay alive.
Weapons of terror fired to the sound of triumphant music in a video released by Russian-backed separatists, claiming these thermobaric explosives, known as vacuum bombs, were fired near Mariupol. Sky News has been unable to verify this footage, but what we can say with certainty is they inflict horrific impact, sucking the air out of people's lungs as they pull in oxygen to generate an explosion. Many felt it was a matter of time before these bombs were used in Ukraine. The destroyed city of Mariupol, a clear example, Russia appears to have no boundaries. An estimated 300,000 people remain trapped here, subjected to nightly bombing. Anastasia managed to escape with 20 minutes warning. She fled for her life, but hasn't heard from her relatives in the 3 days since.
When they started bombing us from airplanes, it was already impossible to stay. We were hiding just in our apartment. We did not have any shelter close to us or something like this. Now I am thinking about food that we still have left in my apartment, and I'm thinking that, oh my God, it could be helpful for my neighbors. Maybe we could give that food to someone. We did not have time. We just have something like 20 minutes to pack. I only took my laptop and shoes with me. That's it. So I was crying about, that maybe it would help someone.
The city has been without power, water and food supplies for days. Anastasia shared this video with Sky News, showing the lengths she had to go to just for drinking water, queuing at the well closest to her apartment, where she'd remained in hiding. After this theatre was bombed, many fear shelters have become targets. 4 days on, more than 1,000 civilians are thought to remain trapped in its basement. Now an art school has been hit too, sheltering 400 people, including children and the elderly. Rescuers unable to reach them due to Russian forces fighting street to street.